Alright, hey guys, this is Beth from Queen City Clay, and in this video we are going to be making an egg dish. I thought that this was appropriate for the time of year because these little plastic Easter eggs are super prevalent at your local Kroger store. So we are going to start by talking about the mold that we're going to make. So this mold was made from a scrap piece of wood that I just found in my basement or my garage or something, and some plastic Easter eggs that I got at my local Kroger. So for this particular mold, I used the larger size Easter egg, and you can see there's quite a difference between the large egg and the small egg. Okay, so once your clay shrinks, it is going to be the opening that this mold is going to create is going to be more appropriate for the small size egg. Okay, so this is really more realistic to what an egg is going to look like from the store or from a farm, so it's going to fit into that little divot a little bit nicer. Okay, so I basically took half of the egg. All right, so I took like the more eggy half, popped them open, and then I kind of drew a little mark of where I wanted them to be on my mold. Just use a Sharpie, and then with some hot glue I attached them onto the wood. Okay, so I just really loaded up the hot glue and just kind of stuck them down on there. This mold has actually, I've had it for about 2 years now, and these have never popped off. So it's been lasted a long time, and I think it has lots more use in it. So before I get started, I will make sure that I don't have any clay, like little clay chunks or anything like that on my plastic eggs. I want to make sure that those don't get kind of embedded into my fresh clay here. There is a little bit of cornstarch residue on here, and that's okay. That's not going to be a problem. So I will set this to the side. I'm going to start with a slab, and there was a previous video that I did on how to roll a slab at home without a slab roller. Don't let that intimidate you. It's really super simple. You just need a couple of yardsticks or paint sticks, something like that, and a good, nice steady rolling pin. So you should be just fine doing that. But I got this down. I don't want this slab to be super duper thin, but it's probably like a little over, I don't know, anywhere between 1/4 to 1/2 inch would be fine for this. You can always, it kind of stretches over the mold, so a little bit thicker is better, but you just don't want it to be super thin, otherwise it can kind of stretch and break over these egg pieces. Okay, so I've rolled out my slab. It's nice and even. I am going to rib it really well with my yellow rib. This is my favorite rib for ribbing out my slabs. I feel like it gives a really nice compression. And I want to rib these slabs in different directions, okay? I'm going to do both sides as well. I'm working on just a piece of drywall board, okay? And that's great for working at home because you can really stick it on top of any work surface, and you're going to protect your work surface, and you're going to have a nice surface that your clay is not going to stick to really badly. So it's going to be easy for that clay to kind of dry and pop off of that surface. Okay, so before we put this on our mold, we have to apply some sort of release agent here. So this is cornstarch. So I just got this at my Kroger store. This is like $1.99 for this container, and I just put it in an old sock. I stick it in an old sock. Obviously the sock is clean, and just wrap it with a rubber band. And because the sock is really thin, the cornstarch is going to kind of come out of it. Okay, and it's important that we don't that we put the release agent on our clay and not on the actual mold itself, because this mold has so many vertical surfaces. That cornstarch if we just put it on the mold, the cornstarch will stay on the top and the bottom, but it's gonna roll right off the side of that mold, okay? So it's important to put that release on the clay, okay? Some people like to use like a cooking spray or something. I just prefer to use the cornstarch. I like it a lot better for this particular technique, okay? So I'm going to pick up my slab and I'm going to gently kind of drape it over my mold, okay? And because this is on a piece of wood, I can kind of move it around as I need to. And you'll see that I made this slab larger than the mold needs, okay? So it will kind of hang over the sides and I have some excess here. So I am going to use a just a regular sponge that is dipped in water and completely wrung out with no excess, like no dripping. Okay, so I just want this to be able to kind of slide across the surface of my clay, but not add a whole bunch of extra moisture to it. Okay, so what this is doing right now is this is kind of just helping me find all of those egg pieces, and I'm just gonna work my sponge around those eggs. To find all the edges, okay? And I'm gonna kind of work that clay around. And since I'm using a really super fresh piece of clay, every like mark that I make is gonna kind of be picked up in that clay. So because I do that, oftentimes I will, you can go back in and smooth all that back out. But what I'll do sometimes is I will impress my fingerprints into the bottom of this. So I'm kind of using that mark making to my advantage there. So I will go in and press my fingerprints into all those sides. Go ahead and get that pressed in, okay. And then I'm going to use just any knife or needle tool is totally fine for this. But I'm just going to cut around my form, okay? And at this stage, you really have a lot of flexibility on how you're going to cut this out. Really, you just need that indentation of the egg to make this functional. Anything from here on out is kind of an aesthetic choice. So I like to kind of follow along with that curve. And I will save this scrap clay, so even though there's cornstarch on this, that's not going to hurt the clay. It will obviously dry it out a little bit, but I will kind of loosely pile this to the side, and I'll just kind of dunk it in some water and then put it in a just a scrap bag of clay, and then I'll re-wedge that clay later and then work it into a new slab or some, you know, balls to put on the pottery wheel, whatever. Set that aside. And at this point, I am ready to flip this over. Okay, so this first cut was really just a starting point. I will trim it back a little bit more once I flip it, but I'll put my board on top and give it a couple taps just to make sure I'm getting a flat bottom. And usually I'll get down kind of on the same level as that and just kind of check for how even that's going to be, how level it's going to be, and then I will sandwich this between my hands, flip it over, and then I can pop my mold right out. Okay, so at this point I'll kind of give myself a few little wiggles, kind of get my curves right, and then I can go back in and trim this up and smooth it out as needed. The cornstarch that's on there is totally okay. I usually just let it dry on the surface, and then I'll kind of give it a good wipe before I put it in the bisque firing. And then of course after it comes out of the bisque firing and I'm going to glaze it, I will be sure to rinse the surface of my pieces really well under running water before I go to dip it in any glaze or paint any glaze on. We want to make sure we get any of that dust off the surface, but it's not going to harm anything in that bisque firing, in that initial firing. So at this point, this can just kind of set up and dry. I usually like to keep them covered lightly for a day or two just to dry a little slowly so that there's no cracking, but I don't typically have a lot of problems with that. So I hope you like this video, and please keep an eye out for more.